Today, on this first Sunday of Advent, I'd like to reflect with you on the concept of longing. In our somewhat superficial culture of affluenza and immediate gratification, I don't think we talk about longing enough. It's just not really cool to be wanting or to admit that you have needs or desires that are unmet. This can be seen as weakness. When I use the word longing, I'm talking about the deepest and most unfulfilled desires of your heart. And I think we're all longing for something or someone. Most of us right now are longing for the coronavirus crisis and its accompanying quarantines to end. We long to get back to church, to school, to our offices, and for things to get back to some semblance of normal. I certainly long for that. But I believe many of us long for even deeper things, bigger things, people, places, and relationships that we hope will fulfill us, bring us joy, and give us security and peace. We might long for a job or a new job, a better job. We may long for a significant relationship, maybe a life partner or a spouse. Some of us may long for a child to express our generativity. Some of us long and dream for big systemic changes, like a unified country, a greener and more sustainable way of life on our planet, for racial reconciliation, an end to poverty and food insecurity, and a world of justice and peace. We are all longing for something or someone. But I'm afraid that experience teaches us that what we long for is often elusive, a dream that rarely becomes a reality. We often feel let down and disappointed. We photograph the perfect sunset, but then when we look at the pictures after, it looks rather ordinary. The excitement of a new career settles into the humdrum of a job. And the first flush of a new relationship turns into predictability and coordinating calendars and dates. Even when we find what we think we are longing for, we may for a moment find the experience quite exquisite, but fleeting, leaving us unsatisfied. That is why spiritual writers tell us that what we are longing for, whether we realize it or not, is really God. The longed for thing or person who will ultimately fulfill us, bring us joy, and grant us peace is God. My soul is restless until it rests in thee, said St. Augustine. Everything else, even the exquisitely true and beautiful and good things of this life, will leave us unsatisfied at some level. Life is transient, and we continue our search for lasting and true fulfillment and flourishing and love. So in our gospel lesson for today, Jesus tells his disciples to keep awake. This admonition comes at the end of a very long apocalyptic discourse with all this doom and gloom about the end times. He and his disciples had left the temple, and he told them that someday it would all be thrown down, not one stone left upon another. And the disciples, naturally enough, ask when this will be. And Jesus responds with a long discourse that involves apocalyptic signs like the sun being darkened and the stars falling like the heaven. It is all rather complex and confusing, but in the midst of it, there is an assurance. And the assurance is this: in spite of all this doom and gloom and horror, someday the Son of Man will return to set things right. No matter how bad it gets, and that you can't even imagine living to the next day, we're given the promise that the Son of Man will return to set it right. This will be good news for some and bad news for others. We ought to prepare so that we can receive the coming of the Lord as good news, and yet no one knows, not even the Son, when all these things will take place. But they will take place. Therefore, Jesus says, keep awake, keep alert, and keep looking for the true Lord who will bring all these things to fulfillment. There will be many pretenders, many people saying, look, here's the Messiah, or look, there he is, Donald Trump. But do not believe in these pretenders. They are false, and they will let you down. Trust only in the true God, the Lord of heaven and earth, and his only Son. Keep awake, for he will come. Apocalyptic language is hard for us to understand today, but the basic message is easy enough. But I want to say, maybe it's actually time for us to hear apocalyptic language. For aren't things pretty dire? Our country feels like it's falling apart. Our world is deeply troubled. Our economy is terrible. People have lost jobs. We're concerned that there will be so many people evicted from their homes and their apartments and foreclosed upon. The coronavirus is everywhere and it's getting worse. We honestly don't know whether we will live or die to see the next day. So, the message behind this apocalyptic story is very fresh for us. We're longing for something, and that something is God, and there will be other things that get in the way who try to offer us the fulfillment that only God can provide. Remember the allure of that perfect job or that perfect relationship? All these things inevitably let us down because they can't deliver the promises they make. They're good enough in themselves, but when we look to them as our ultimate source of truth and meaning and satisfaction and fulfillment, they inevitably let us down and they leave us unsatisfied. More than that, we can be damaged in the process, feeling broken promises, broken relationships, broken hearts, and broken spirits. Only God can truly fulfill us and the desires of the whole groaning universe. Jesus tells us to keep awake, to turn away from false messiahs, to look for the coming of the true God. And the good news is that even as we flit about in our search for truth and meaning, God's holiness and graciousness are already racing to meet us. God is coming. The Son of Man is coming. Keep awake. Advent is the season of the church year when we try to reflect on who or what we are truly longing for. It is a time to reflect and pray about what it is that will fulfill our heart's desire. The good news of Advent is that God is also longing for us. The story of Advent is not a story of a God waiting to see if human beings finally figure it out and find God. The story of Advent is that God comes to us. And better yet, that God has already found us. God has come. We may feel like we are always looking or searching or longing, but the good news of Advent is that God has already come to us, is coming to us, and will keep coming to us. In our searching, our seeking, our longing, we often fail to see the gift that has already been given, the gift of God with us, the gift of Immanuel, God with us. One of my favorite places in the world is Key West, Florida. I haven't been there for quite a while, but when we lived in Ohio, Mark and I would visit every year or two. And our favorite thing to do when we were in Key West was to gather at sunset in Mallory Square, where the sunset celebration is enacted every day, 365 days a year. In fact, it is the most popular tourist attraction in Key West. Maybe some of you have been. Hundreds of people gather each day a few hours before sunset to wait for the sun to set. And of course, the celebration has grown from a small, intimate gathering of sunset watchers to now a more formal street fair with arts and crafts exhibitors, street performers, food carts. And as you might imagine, it can become quite crowded. Well, one day, while Mark and I were there waiting for the sun to set, while enjoying our favorite street performer, Dominique's circus cats, yes, you heard right, trained cats that jump through hoops on command and interact in all of these curious ways with their very eccentric French trainer, Dominique. It was getting closer to sunset, and we noticed that people were beginning to gather near the fence that overlooked the water. And the crowd was pressing in to look out at the horizon. We were somewhere in the crowd when all of a sudden we heard a very loud vehicle without a muffler, and we noticed an old broken down looking van. And it limped into the parking lot, and a parking attendant ushered the van to a handicap parking space near the crowd. We watched as a very old and frail couple exited the van, and they lowered the wheelchair ramp and on the van, and then the old woman pushed a wheelchair into the square. The person in the chair was a very severely disabled middle-aged man. His limbs were gnarled with contractures, and his head was bowed very far forward, and his spine was curved. I imagine that he was this couple's son because of the incredible tenderness and attention that they gave him. And the old man went ahead of the wheelchair that was being pushed by the old woman. And the old man began parting the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea, saying things like, "Excuse me, step aside, folks, make way for Jimmy." Well, the regulars in the crowd must have known Jimmy because they very deferently moved out of the way. And some of them seemed to almost bow to his chair as it passed them. And eventually, Jimmy was right up against the viewing fence, a front row seat. And we waited. And we waited some more. And we watched as the fiery orb of the sun turned a deeper orange red as it descended into the watery horizon. And then, just as the sun in its full flame, in its final burst of glory, dropped below the rim of the world, I saw the parents reach under Jimmy's chin. and they raised his lowered head and pointed him out toward the horizon. It was then, as is the daily custom, the crowd burst into cheers and started clapping at the setting of the sun. And Jimmy just looked and wept. It was then, at that moment, that I knew that God can dazzle us with all the magnificence of the universe, but that the secret of the universe lies in a love that comes to us in our deepest weakness and our need. That the secret of the universe lies in a love that comes to us in our weakness and our deepest need. The season of Advent begins today. It is a season of hope. Stay alert. Keep awake. Lift up your heads and look out to the horizon. Look to the future. Look for the God who comes to us, who came to us, who is with us now until the end of the age. Amen.